to call the meeting to order, and I just want everybody to realize that we can't do much until we can't make any decisions until we get some more board members. We don't have a quorum yet, but we can certainly call the meeting to order and make some adjustments to the agenda. I would like to change 5. I'd like to have 5A be principals report, and then 5B will be budget discussion.
And if you don't mind, I would like to rephrase 6A, and I think it's important to get that out there because there may be some people who are interested in hearing about or commenting on 6A. But 6A, as it reads, is 4 days per week of in-person instruction for all not fully remote students at the start of the second semester. And I would like to change that to 4 days per week of in-person instruction for all not fully remote students by the first week of in-person instruction after the February break. So essentially moving that down the road a bit. And I think it's important to get that out there because I don't want people to spend a lot of time in communication public comments talking about something. It may still go that direction, but that's not going to be what I'm recommending. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Why don't you just say as soon as possible?
Listen, you know, Steve, when you were board chair, you were the one that made the policy that said, just let the principal decide when animals can be here. And I loved you for it. So I'm good with that too, but we'll get to discuss that when we get to that point.
Touche.
All right. Review and approve board minutes of December 28th.
I think you, by the way, I think you have a quorum now because I see Brenda here.
Oh, good. Thank you.
But I don't want to be the one that owns that statement.
I'm looking, Chris. I won't hold you to it.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, I'm having to go through the list here, but it appears to me that I have 6 board members, including myself, which gives us a quorum.
David, you're muted.
Yes, David.
Molly, I move to approve the minutes.
Thank
Margaret will second.
you. Is there any discussion? It looks like there is none. All those in favor of approving the board minutes of December 28th? Let me go right through my list. Brenda?
Aye.
David?
Yes, Molly.
Margot?
Yes.
Thank you. Priscilla?
Yes.
And Steve Fine.
I was wondering if you were going to remember me this time. Yes.
Thank you so very much.
Molly Jack Breyer has also joined.
I
Thank you.
thought you needed a quorum, so here I am.
Jack, are you on? Would you like to approve the board minutes of December 28th?
I'm going to abstain because I just got on and I got to look at the board minutes of December 28th.
Perfect. Okay, motion passes. The minutes are approved. Communication and public comments.
I
I'm not
have
sure who's. Go ahead.
I have an
I'm
email
sorry, I
from a
see a
parent
gentleman-
when you get a chance, but I don't have to be first.
Okay, I'm gonna pick everybody else first before you, Chris.
Okay, sounds good.
I see someone, I'm sorry, I don't hear your name, but it says Donka.
He's an old friend.
Don Capicelli.
Capicelli.
Yeah.
Oh, Don.
I just want to see how things are shaping up for the annual meeting. I'm wondering if, I'm assuming you're doing a Zoom version of our usual format. I'm the moderator, so I'm going to need someone, I'm going to need some help running the Zoom. I've never run a Zoom meeting. I had one question. The positions like the moderator and clerk and treasurer, are those going to be voted by the board at the annual meeting, or do we have to wind up on the Australian ballot on March 2nd? Anybody know that?
I do.
Go ahead, Jack.
It's the same rules we had for our Australian ballot for the unified district meeting. And yes, indeed, you're going to need to collect. Signatures, but you do need to be on the actual ballot, because you can't elect any officers via the Zoom meeting. The Zoom meeting can't, in fact, do any actual business involving dollars or electing officers. It has to be done by Australian ballot. And that's a very good point and something that will need to be done. Your meeting, the candidates need to be in fairly soon, and they need to be in at least 30 days before you actually have your meeting. And your warning for the vote is just like your normal warning, but you do need to have all that stuff together now, because is effectively, you're merging all of your normal district stuff with your Australian ballot budget vote.
All right, my understanding, the assistant town clerk here in Athens, that there's a form that's on the state website where even incumbents have to submit this form by January 25th to get on the ballot. So
that's correct.
If folks are not aware of that, they should know about that. That was it as far as my stuff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Don. Chris Pratt, I don't see anybody's hand up. Is there anybody else other than our principal who would like to speak?
I don't have anyone chat and I don't see anyone on the screen.
Okay, Chris, it's all you.
So I'm going to preface this by saying this is an email from a parent. And the context of this is the proposal of going from 2 days a week of in-person for each student to 4 days per week for each student, beginning in the start of the second semester, which is about a week and a half away or thereabouts. Good morning, Chris. I think this is a terrible mistake at this point in time. It concerns me greatly for the safety of our students, teachers, and staff. As everyone knows, COVID cases in Southern Vermont in our area have exploded since Thanksgiving. Last week, a remote week, almost every day I learned of at least one new case in people I know. Most of these people have been careful and also have been asymptomatic, but exposed and then tested positive. My second point is that teachers, students, and school staff have been pushed back on the vaccination schedule. Not only is this unacceptable, it is dangerous, especially in the high school grades. I feel this means as soon as kids get back to school, there will be multiple cases and we will be stuck, because not only will kids miss school for quarantining, but when teachers get sick, there are no subs to cover their classes. This is absolutely not the time to put the students, teachers, and staff at risk. Until the vaccine is available to students who are old enough, teachers and staff who choose to get it, we shouldn't even consider these people going 4 days a week. If the vaccine is available and parents choose for their children not to get it, or the adults who work in the schools choose not to get it, that's the way it is. If they come down with COVID, it's on them. Right now, if my child comes down with COVID, it will be on the school, because she doesn't go anywhere else without wearing a mask and social distancing, even if it's only for essentials. I know that people are concerned about the mental health of the students. I get this. However, how will the students feel if they bring COVID home to their parents, grandparents, siblings, etc., and one of them passes away from the virus? That will really be a detriment to the students' mental health, knowing they brought this into their home. What happens when a beloved teacher passes away because they wanted the vaccine but weren't eligible yet, and the inevitable happens? This will be a detriment to the student's mental health. What if, God forbid, a student passes away? It's not unheard of, and these are older kids. We all remember the impact that a student's death can have on a school community. Sadly, you can't work on a child's mental health if they have passed away. But we have the chance to save their physical health right now, and in that, save their mental health as well by keeping them healthy and safe. We have the power right now. Please don't take that for granted. In conclusion, I want my child back at school full-time as soon as possible, but not at the expense of her health. I wouldn't be a responsible parent if I thought otherwise. Obviously, this is my opinion. I don't hold it against others who have different opinions, but for my family, the only safe and healthy option is to continue with 2 days at school and 3 days remote. I don't want my child put at risk. Thank you for reading and considering my opinion.
Thank you, Chris.
Molly, we do have someone from the public, Chad Illingworth.
Can I ask who that letter was from?
Yeah, Stephanie Mitchell.
Thanks.
Chad Illingworth, can you hear me? Chad,
So, all right, can you hear me?
now I got you.
All right. Mike, first, I guess is a quick question. Chris Hodson said something about maybe not doing this to the February break. Is that correct?
That's how we changed the agenda to
Okay.
first in-person week after the February break. That's the change to the agenda.
And that's the goal?
That's what I'm going to recommend to the board.
Okay. And what if numbers stay the same? My concern is we're sitting here having a school board virtually, but we're going to then say, hey, let's have our kids go 4 days a week. I've felt extremely comfortable with my daughter going to that school in the current situation. I think you as a staff and even educating the public with, pictures on Facebook, pictures on the school site to see that kids are actually spaced. My fear is with double the amount, it won't be that way. So the question would be is, even if you said, yes, we're going to do it after February break, is there a threshold in mind to say, no, we're not going to move forward because the numbers are still high?
And
So
all I can
we're-
say is we'll have a conversation about that under that item. Generally, it's not a back and forth during these. I just want to say, Chad, I hear you, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay. All right.
Is there anyone else from the public?
No, I have no further.
Yeah, I don't see anybody either. Okay. So we are going to move to 5A, which we changed to principals report.
So I appreciate you accommodating me with some quick updates. I've got 4 things. I'm going to cruise through them. And then if there happen to be questions, we can do that at the end. But it's essentially good news and things that will likely come up more formally on an agenda down the line. So I was asked to update. The first one is our HVAC investigation. Short version is I have a draft report from that work, but I have not had a chance to review that with the people who produced the report. So typically I'm reluctant to share much from a draft report, but I do have to. The short version is there is nothing in this report that leaves us concerned for the safety of the air in our building. And so I will read the one short blurb because they covered a ton of territory in this, beyond even just, are we COVID-19 safe? But I will read their little bit on this. School response to CDC guidelines. The school has faithfully followed the 3 CDC recommendations listed. The school has installed filters with higher MERV ratings than the minimum recommendation, as well as increased frequency of changes to quarterly. Existing controls are direct digital control and reportedly have been programmed to do building flushes 2 hours pre-occupancy beginning at 6 a.m. and 1 hour post-occupancy. And finally, while ventilation rates haven't been increased, the occupant counts have been decreased through implementing a virtual model of learning. Thus, this effectively increased the amount of outdoor air per person. As you can imagine, there's missing parts there. There's checklists that they used to kind of come to that conclusion, but that's their summary. And that's what we've got so far. So that's topic number 1. Topic number 2, I was asked to speak briefly just to the topic of the general public accessing the building. And just like everything in our COVID-19 world, there are additional restrictions regarding general public being in the building. There is not necessarily a outright prohibition against that, but if there's a need or a request for that, my first consideration is, would we do that in non-COVID times? And if the answer is yes, the question is, can we do that safely in COVID times, following all of our procedures and protocols. And so essentially, those kinds of requests are taken on a case-by-case basis, but would not be done in any way to jeopardize the health and safety of the staff and students. Topic number 3, basketball update. Practices have begun. As of today's practice, I think we are at 9 practices. Maybe this is our 10th practice. I share that with you because 10 practices is the key to playing games. The other key to playing games is having the state say we can play games. So currently basketball practice happens in a 6 feet apart at all times situation. So not only coming in and screening and having your spot on the bleachers, which is 6 feet away from everybody else, but even during practice, drills have to be done 6 feet apart. Anyone that knows basketball knows that that kind of practice has to change before we get to games. So before we get to games, the state's going to have to authorize, for all intents and purposes, regular old practices. And then once we have that, we'll be in a place to play games. This would have been the first week to start playing games, but most of our opponents are nowhere near 10 practices anyhow. So it's not likely at all that we'll play any games this week. And whether or not we play next week, again, is going to be determined by the state loosening things up as far as basketball is concerned. And the last thing I'll note is we just installed a new camera that is going to be very good for streaming our games to the general public through Fact TV. I mentioned that a little bit at the last meeting, more to follow on that. And while I'm on the topic of good news, the last thing I'll note, and this again will have to be an agenda item for a future meeting, is we received in the mail last week the donation of $5,000 toward our athletic program from Vermont Ben Wynn Charities, who have been very generous with us over the years. But you folks will have to formally accept that with a board motion at a future meeting. That's all I got.
Thank you, Chris. David?
Thank you, Molly. I was contacted just before the meeting by my Rockingham constituent, Jason Terry, who asked me to convey his disappointment that we would not be having practices during exam period, or so it was represented to him. And I do share his disappointment somewhat from the perspective that in as much as this D3 school is going to be up against some D1 and D2 on their schedule, I think that as many practices as we can possibly get in might give us a little bit more of a competitive edge. So
can I speak to that for a moment?
Absolutely.
So our approach to exam, first of all, what we typically do is ensure that the day before a day of exams, we have no games. This year, because of our need to work cohort A separately from cohort B, we've had to redesign our schedule of exams in a way that I'm not thrilled about and is not the best for students, but it is what we had to do. So we are scheduling 1 day of exams for cohort A. We're scheduling 1 day of exams for cohort B. And Friday will be a makeup day, but it's also a day for students, if they are overloaded on a day, to move an exam. So when students will typically have a 2-day period to get 4 exams done, we're cramming it in a little bit more. And so it is, and with our restrictions on learning, I really felt like it was important to give those kids a chance to focus on preparing for their exams. And for what it's worth, I only had a conversation with one of our head basketball coaches on that, and he felt like it was a great idea. He fully supported it. So, but I get the interest in playing. So.
Molly, if I could very briefly respond to Principal Hodgson, I would simply like to say, go BF.
Anyone else have anything for our principal? I don't see anything. let's
Molly?
move on. Yes,
Just one thing. Chris mentioned that one of the reasons they got a okay sign from the consultants was because of our occupancy rates, which are halved right now because of the hybrid model that we have in place. I think it's important, as we discussed, moving from that to a 4-day schedule and effectively doubling the number of students in the building, whether the engineers feel that we're still okay once we've doubled the student count in the building. That was, that's a key criteria in terms of going forward with the new plan.
thank you, Jack. I believe Chris has some more information on that when we get to that item, right, Chris?
I do,
The
yep.
numbers of what's happening.
Okay.
Thank you. So 5B, budget discussion. What it really is we need to approve a budget. I would like someone to make a motion to approve the budget as presented and then get some discussion going.
This is Margot. I'll make a motion to approve the budget as proposed.
Can I get somebody to second it? David, are you seconding?
Yes, Molly. A
you.
second for purpose of discussion.
Thank you. Chris or Flora, who wants to present?
I'll start.
Thank you.
So the budget that you folks have access to, and there was a version that came out last week. I think maybe it was Friday or Saturday. There was another version that came out today with a few changes. No, like one change to it, you might say. But let me just hit the highlights. Other than that, the budget that you're looking at is essentially the budget that you were looking at the last time we came together, except it's got a decrease of about $21,000 to it. So the budget is down by $21,000 from the last time you saw that. And I can speak to really 3 lines that changed. There are 2 lines that are associated with the RVTC Career Center, the Springfield Career Center. We have real numbers to plug in there now, and we plugged in real numbers. Those real numbers increased the budget by $13,422. We had been carrying along level funded numbers, and I don't have a good number or page system. I printed mine out, but suffice it to say, those are 2 lines that changed. They went from 223,109 on one of them to 231,458. And one went from 145,729 to 151,050. Again, the total was an increase of $13,422. That was offset by some adjustments that were made in what we refer to as the contingency line. I can call your attention to that line a little bit easier because it goes by colors. So if you are looking at the spreadsheet with all of the budget lines, go to the end of the yellow colors. I'm going to give you a little chance to do that. Now, when I said actually that there were 3 lines that were changed, actually there were a lot of lines changed and I misspoke. The reason for that is there was a board member who advocated for returning to the contingency in one spot approach that we have used in the past. And by that, I mean, when in the number of times that we have had to produce a budget while we were still negotiating a contract, it was prudent to build in a contingency to be able to pay for whatever the results of that contract are. The approach that you saw initially was to build in an amount to every salary line. And that's what you saw last time. What has happened since then was we have level funded all of the salaries and plugged in a contingency line, which is Board of Ed special items. Again, the second to last item on the yellow section.
I am sharing the screens, Chris. I'm sorry.
Yep, there
In
we
case
go.
it helps. Yeah, so that way we can see what they can see what you're talking about. Makes
Excellent.
it maybe easier.
Thank you, Flora. So what was essentially a total of an $81,900 increase, which was broken out for salary purposes, has been plugged into that Board of Ed contingency line. Now you may wonder, why is it at $163,934? Well, this is our second year of creating a budget without a master agreement to guide that. So currently the staff are working from level funded contracts, you might say. And as we're building this budget for next year, it's essentially 2 years worth of contingency. But where does the savings come? Well, let me tell you this. Originally, we had just rolled over the 116,437, but we recognized that that included contingencies for healthcare, which now is not part of the negotiations, I do believe, which has been kind of handed to us by the state. So those healthcare increases have been already budgeted in their individual lines. So this is the long version of when you take all of the salary increases that were in all the other lines, and you take the contingency that still needs to be in place for this year's contracts. In the end, that all sugared out to a decrease of $34,740. So when you take the increase of $13,400 and subtract that from the $34,740, you have an overall decrease of the budget from the last time that you looked at it of $21,000 and change. So bottom line, for those of you that are bottom line types, is this budget is $152,333 below the previous budget, for an overall decrease of 2%, which I hope the taxpayers will like. Everyone get that?
So I can't see the screen, but is there anybody that would like to ask any questions?
Molly, I have a comment.
Yes, David.
Comment is that the River Valley Tech Center has not approved a budget yet. And the reason that the Tech Center has not approved the budget is that we're looking to see if there will be any benefit from what's known as hold harmless money, which essentially is your full-time equivalents. And there has been discussion that perhaps, particularly with tech centers, which have lost enrollment because of the logistical difficulties that COVID has created, that maybe perhaps the state will extend some of that largesse to the tech centers. If that's the case, we may end up with a little bit less, but the tech center budget, I believe right at the moment, is up 0.3% overall compared to its fiscal year 21 budget. And the hit that we've taken is simply our assessment for the kids who are up there compared to everyone else's assessment.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions about the budget? Priscilla?
Yes, I was just wondering if you could, if somebody could explain to me why the HRA, HSA, and also the life insurance ones have shown an increase. I thought HRA and HSA were basically a set amount. So I'm trying to figure out why there's an increase in each one of those lines. And did the life insurance costs from the company come up?
I will have to defer to the business manager on that one when it's a benefit thing.
Yes, so HRA debt went up $400 per person. So it used to be 4,000. Now it is actually 4,400. So they did go up. And so HRA, we used to have it through Health Equity. Now it's directly through Blue Cross Blue Shield. So it's not outsourced anymore to Health Equity. So it did go up $400 per person. And same thing with
Laura, let me ask on that. But I thought in the contract it specified a certain amount, and did that change?
it did change to 4,400.
In the contract, in the
Yes.
teacher's contract.
Yeah, so before I put all these numbers in, I did meet with HR with Joellen. So we did went with all the increases that she had mentioned, but I could get that information as well as send it to you guys. I did send already the BFUHS information of how much the insurance was gonna go overall up, and the specifications of how much it was allocated to each of the different areas that they took into consideration for those races. So I could just forward information as well as the HRA, how it did change, and life insurance and the other insurance that you guys asked.
Thanks.
David?
Thank you, Molly. I posed a question to Chris in the business office earlier today about what the effect of the high school budget was going to be on taxation. And I was hoping that we'd get some information about that before we're asked to approve a budget when we don't necessarily know what the impact on taxpayers is going to be.
Well, let me just speak a little bit to that, although I am not the guy that does the tax calculations, but, and as you know, David, but I'm going to say for the sake of other folks, there are many variables that go into that calculation. And obviously this is a point where we control one of those variables. I will say that this is the lowest increase, the greatest decrease that in my 16 years I've brought forward. So, and I want to acknowledge, because you and David, you and I have had this conversation, that that's a collaborative effort between the WNESU keeping the belts tight and the BFUHS keeping the belts tight. But being down by 2% certainly contributes positively to the tax rate, even better than a budget that's up by 0.3% or whatever RVTC's was. But the other thing that I would note is we have a surplus that we commonly use in two ways. One is to offset the burden to the taxpayers, and then also to do a little rainy day savings. But I would recommend that $100,000 of that roll back into, at least $100,000 of it roll back into the revenue side, and that also will offset the burden to the taxpayers. So so clearly that's not the answer to your question, David, like what's the tax rate? But I do want to just acknowledge for your benefit and for the board that this is moving in a good tax direction for the things we have control over. But I don't know whether Flora has a real answer for you.
Chris, I want to just comment very briefly that a shorter answer would have been, we don't know.
Okay.
And it is going to be difficult for me to vote for a budget when we don't know what the impact on taxpayers is going to be.
Go ahead, Flora.
Yes, so I did started making calculations. So we did know that overall for the high school, the impact is $1.82, but there was a lot of pieces to take into consideration. And I'm not sure if David had an idea of all the parts that come into consideration for this. It's not something that he emailed me in the afternoon and I could have just prepared a glance. So it's not only the taxes for one town. So we do have Athens, Grafton, Westminster, and Rockingham to take all of their percentage in consideration. Equalized pupils information for all of them. As well, I have to contact the state to see if they have any final numbers, because the numbers that they provided was preliminary. So I actually didn't feel comfortable to bring up to you and just publicly announce that this is the impact that is going to be for each of the areas or towns. Meanwhile, that could actually change. So that's why we didn't have a number for you. Is because there's a lot of parts. State is not finalizing a lot of his areas. Equalized pupils and tuitions for FY22 are just deadlines for the 15th. So none of that information is still provided to the state. So we are working in a lot of different parts that is actually what's going to give you the overall tax amount that it will be. But that's why we try to adjust the budget. That's why we try to go as low as we could. And, you know, to try not to affect the taxes. But other than that, there's not a lot more that we could have done.
Anyone else have any questions? Chris, do you see anybody?
Jack
Chris
Breyer
Pratt?
and Steve Fine.
Jack Breyer, go for it.
A couple of things. The first one is the state requires us to run budgets that do not have a deficit. And I'm always concerned when we make assumptions about contingencies or eliminate them, because if they're a situation where there is a forecastable cost that we're not including, we're technically in violation of state law. Not that there's any real penalty for doing it, but it is state law that we run, that we don't run deficits, and I'm concerned about that in this budget. The second thing, and this is more something for Flora and for the team, generally when we warn budgets, we tend to warn them with a dollar amount, and we have in the material we hand to voters a forecasted tax rate or equalized per pupil cost. Are we not going to be able to do that? Because I don't know if we can actually present a budget without it.
No, the state,
Or-
we're waiting for the state to give us their information, because talking to Flora earlier, she talked to Brad James. So we're waiting for some information from the state so we can finish that form that we usually have for all of you and the taxpayers. Is that correct, Flora?
Yes, I did submit that last week on Friday. We did send the information to the state.
Are we going to have a quickie meeting to formalize the warning with that information? What's your thoughts, Chris and Flora? What are we doing? How do we handle this?
Well, I think Flora asked, I wasn't sure if she was able to get an answer from Brad James or when the state's going to be able to give us this information so we can finish our calculations. Flora, were you able to get an answer from Brad? I couldn't recall in our
I
conversation.
just sent his an email this morning when I got the questions from David, but I haven't got an answer yet.
So we have to have it by the 21st, do we not?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of stuff that we have to get done. So, I mean, right now we're at the mercy of the state waiting for the information to be completed on their end so we can complete what we have to do so we can give it to the boards and the public and
All right,
we have
so-
it ready for printing.
So we will need in order to issue a warning, we're going to need to have a vote on the warning sometime later this month, preferably before the 21st, with that data, because that's part of the legal requirement, I think. Am I wrong on that? I think that's what we had to do the last two times, and I'm just trying, I pulled up my old budget from both the high school and the unified district, and that was in there, and it looks like state law requires it. So
That sounds right, Jack. I think I recall last year we had to have a meeting to approve the articles. I'm not sure which board it was, but I do recall that some boards had to do
Yeah.
that.
We do that here every year.
Okay, so we'll just anticipate a 10-minute quickie meeting to one of the articles sometime between now and the 21st of March.
Yeah, but as soon as
Alright.
we can get the information from the state, I mean, we'll jump right on it and get that done.
Okay, but we can certainly approve a budget tonight without necessarily having that data. That can be a discussion, and it often is something we do a week, even a month before we do the warning. So
Yeah, I
there
just
you
want to be
are.
clear that the work is done on our end.
Yep.
It's- So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that.
Cool. Thanks.
Steve, fine.
Why in the world should we approve a budget before, as David has suggested, we have a serious grasp on what the impact is going to be on the taxpayers? I mean, if we're waiting to hear what the tax rate is going to be, and then we go ahead and adopt a budget tonight, regardless of what that rate may become a week from now or a month from now, or whenever the state decides to get around to doing the work, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but what do I know?
Go
Can I-
ahead, Chris.
So, again, I'm going to give my best response, which is not probably going to satisfy Steve, but in the past, we have had business managers who have very clearly stated they crank out their best guess using a lot of best guess numbers. And I think that has given boards a false sense of, okay, we know what the deal is here, but I have never done the comparison from that best guess to what the reality is, but I guarantee you they're never the same. And so we have left ourselves with this kind of good feeling that with an equation that has lots of variables and a lot of them guesses, here's what we've got. So we've left with the feeling like we're making a decision based on good information, but you're making a decision based on some guesses on some things that the state could change after, and it has happened, change after the formula has been cranked out. So
I'm not suggesting that we wait until somebody decides, hey, this is our best guess. Why can't we wait until we know we've got some firm, serious knowledge?
Because, and again, I don't have all of the timing down, but there are timelines. Historically, every year we need to wrap up our budget within the first 2 weeks of January in order to meet timing deadlines prior to the town meeting. And that's where we're stuck between a rock and a hard place on this topic. So Jack Breyer has his hand up.
There's an easy answer, which is that we haven't, in at least the last 5, if not the last 7 years where I've been on budgets, really known the numbers. The fact is that there is a remarkable amount of decoupling between what the state ends up kicking out as a formula and what we think on January 11th or January 21st for that matter. The reality is that we have gone and had those numbers change dramatically. We had them changed by a couple percent in the unified district just last year. We don't know. This year in particular, because of COVID, because of the reality that the state's trust fund is not what it normally is, because the legislature is in session and one is always terrified when the legislature is in session. We don't know, we cannot guarantee. We can have a best estimate and we can swag a number, but there's really no validity to that number other than the reputation of the business manager, who's often been trashed when those numbers that came out wrong later on. I think we have to figure out what it costs. The state, because it's a state system, determines how much they're going to charge us after the fact. That's just the way the thing is built. The fact that it's a terrible system doesn't change matters or absolve us of our responsibility to determine what we think is the best amount to spend on high school in the next year.
Chris Pratt.
Yeah, Stephen, I think the short answer is that even though the state's going to hang us up and giving us the information on the state, they still don't change the deadlines that we have to meet. So, I mean, we're at the mercy of their deadlines.
Well, let me ask you this. suppose we meet the deadlines with a budget, for example, that's 50% of what's been presented to us. And then we finally get that final number from the state. Is that then too late to increase the budget? Why?
Steve, we have a hard stop deadline. It is March 12th. Excuse me, it is January 21st. And that's the date that is the 40 days before the warning. And that's what we're stuck with. We've been stuck with this for years and years and years. It's always an issue. Unfortunately, two things. We can't run a deficit, so we can't come up with a theoretical number that's low. And two, we still, and you know, if you do that, there is potential penalty. And two, this is a situation we have dealt with, like it or not, for as long as I've been doing budgets on this board, which is kind of a while now. I don't like it either, but it's the reality.
It seems to me that with all the creative minds whose little pictures I'm looking at here, with all of those creative minds at work, we could come up with some way to deal with this in a realistic fashion, regardless of how it's been done for the last 10,000 years. That's all I have to say on it.
David Clark, you're up.
Thank you, Molly. I will take note that I think it was the budget before last that we got double crossed by Phil Scott in June, where he unilaterally changed the numbers on us. That was a rare event. But I will also take note of the fact that right now it's projected that taxpayers, property taxpayers, are going to be taking a 9% hit based on what is known. And I think that is not a comforting feeling. And I have to be blunt. I will not be able to support this budget. And this is only the second time in more than 20 years of service on the high school board. Ironically, the last time I did not support a budget figure, no one else in the room, well, pardon me, Chris, I want to be careful here, Hodgson, a majority of the board members in the room did not support that figure either. I think that if we have the luxury of waiting until January 21st in the hopes of having a firmer revenue picture, that's what we should be doing tonight. My vote is set. I could withdraw my second, but I don't wish to do so because I think we're at a point where members have their minds made up.
So David, I have a question. I wanted to follow up on that. So you're not going to vote to approve the budget because we do not have that equalized pupil chart that everybody used to send out that nobody understood but Dan Axtell and you? Maybe Steve
I think it was
Vine.
Dan Axtell who understood it. I certainly didn't, Molly. But
So I think the public really needs to understand why, because I think that, I think that Flora and Chris have given us a decent budget here to work with, but I think we really need to understand in layman's terms why you feel like we shouldn't.
my concern, Molly, is this. If we put a budget out there which creates significant hardship for taxpayers, we face the very real possibility that the taxpayers will reject that budget and we're going to go back and start carving. And I don't want to get into that kind of feedback loop. I think we want to wait just as long as we can and put a budget which we have some sense of what the revenue picture looks like so that when taxpayers ask us, what's it going to cost us, we can tell them.
Priscilla.
I do like the fact that we're working on getting it down and it's down to 2%. I do know that when we did Rockingham last year, that we had to have that equalized pupil age before we could vote on it. And that really does at least give us some information. With this being not due in final form until the 21st, Could we not wait and till then? Maybe we could table it until January 21st or some date right before that, maybe the end of that. The 18th is what, Monday, maybe the 19th, maybe the 20th. We could table it till the 20th.
So Priscilla, can I ask you a question? Is your Rockingham budget approved?
No, we have a meeting on Wednesday.
Is Jack Breyer, does Westminster even have a budget yet?
Yep, we approved it. We did it already. And we did it knowing that, quite candidly, we think we're looking at 1.5%, possibly 2% if we had 2 districts split. But the reality is that the impact of our numbers really pale in comparison to whatever the state does. And we didn't think we could hack 9% out of our budget to make up for the state's irresponsibility. When my letter goes to taxpayers, that's what it's going to say. And I think we could say the same thing here. If there is a tax increase, what are we, based on the fact that the state isn't going to cover its share, what are we supposed to do? We're going to come in on the 20th and suddenly magically come up with numbers and have a fully itemized budget to warn the public inside of, in a 15-minute meeting the day before? I don't think that's realistic. I think we need to respect the data we've got in front of us. The fact that the state may or may not be responsible is not our problem. We've done our part. This is our recommendation for the cost of running the school. That's what it actually says in the warning. It doesn't say what the tax rate is. It says, this is the board's recommendation for what it will cost to run Bellows Falls Union High School in the upcoming year. And that's what we should be voting for. If we think this is the actual number, we should vote for it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah,
It looks like,
Molly,
yep.
I just wanted to remind people is that similar to what Chris Hodgson was saying earlier, if you look in the past, at least in the time I've been here, I recall working with Edie, and the tax sheets she gave us at this point, they were her best guesstimates. And if you recall last year, for most of us, it changed significantly.
Yeah.
And so in the past, we were making, approving budgets based on the best guesstimates that Edie was giving us. And so, I mean, we've never, because it's constantly changing with the state, we've never had the concrete solid tax numbers we wish we had to go to the taxpayers, or if we had this information for making a decision. So I know it'd be great if we had it, so I know that ultimately the decision's up to the board. I just wanted to remind people that in the past, Edie was giving us our best guesstimate in regards to what the tax impact may have been. And I know last year, it changed so much and we weren't even able to get it back to the printers in time. So it was wrong in the book. So.
By 3% in some places.
So it, go ahead, Flora.
Yes, so before I came to you guys with this, I did had a phone call with another business manager for another school district, and she we spoke about it, and she was the one that actually as well mentioned, that providing information that we don't know if it's accurate is not something that we should bring to the table for anybody to take into consideration to approve a budget. So she is somebody that has more experience than me. And she actually was like, I don't present a budget with something that we are estimating. She shared a cheat sheet that she has, which later on, if you guys need it, I can share it. But it's not information that she wouldn't even feel comfortable, to share. So that's how we
Thank you.
stood. And then I emailed the state and we're still waiting on them.
Go ahead, Priscilla.
Yeah, I do want to say that, after working on the budget last year and working on it this year, Flora seems to have a pretty good handle on a lot of those figures that we were really kind of just someone was just plugging in some numbers in some last. He's done a lot of work, and I do want to at least recognize that. And, you know, thanks, Flora, for what you've done.
Okay, any other board members got any questions before we go to the motion? Chris, do you see anybody?
I do not, Molly.
All right, we have a motion on the floor to approve the budget as presented. I'm gonna start with Deb Wright,
No.
Jack Breyer,
Yes.
Brenda,
Yes.
David Clark,
No.
Margot,
Yes.
Priscilla,
Yes,
Steve,
No,
we have 4 yes and 3 no. The budget has been approved.
Molly, can we just have that total bottom line on the budget, please?
Yes, we can. How'd you like that? Trying to run 2 screens here. I have FY22 requested $502,808. Thank you, Flora. Okay, Chris, I lost my agenda. So you're gonna have to be patient here for a second.
I put it up
Okay,
for you, Molly.
Okay, thank you. I got it too. We are now going to new business for discussion. And we're gonna reword this. I'd like to just get a motion on the floor that moves to authorize the Bellas Falls Union High School administration and staff to transition to a more intensive plan for in-person instruction during this COVID-19 crisis, no earlier than the first week of in-person instruction after the February break, and no later than the start of the 4th quarter unless a subsequent action by this board dictates otherwise.
Molly, I would be willing to offer that motion, but I would like to add the language or dictate from the state of Vermont dictates otherwise.
Okay. Can I get a second?
and Molly, why are we going with then rather than saying after the start of the second semester or after the start of the first semester, second semester? Because if it's deemed that it could go to sooner, then they could start sooner. Say they were started the second semester with it for a week or something and decided that maybe they want to go a little sooner, then that way it would allow them to go sooner.
This is the suggestion from our principal.
So I can speak to that.
Can we get a second on it and then let Chris speak about it?
I'll second it. This is Margot.
Thank you, Margot. Chris, you have the floor.
Sure. So the quick answer for you on that, Priscilla, before I get deeper into this is, and I know what I'm about to say will resonate for you as a former teacher. Making these kinds of transitions, it's really important to give teachers a good amount of heads up and a good amount of planning, but particularly as we transition between more remote or less remote, or more in person or less in person. So there are reasons why I am making a different recommendation than the start of the second semester, but I wanted to identify a very reasonable point in time that I feel comfortable we have a really good shot of making. And to say, let's do it a week into the second semester or 2 weeks into the second semester doesn't give enough time for the COVID situation to change. And quite honestly, that's what's driving my change of recommendation is kind of some recent upticks in COVID-19 cases. And I want to say that despite how safe schools are, we can't make these decisions in a vacuum, and we can't ignore the fact that even though we are doing a really, really good job of establishing some safety procedures, that we live in our community. And so we have to acknowledge that. So Priscilla, so the answer to your question is to give teachers a reasonable amount of heads up in advance of making this transition. So that's.
Didn't they have that heads up when you were going to give us that information?
Well, sure. Yes.
The
Yes.
last board
Absolutely.
meeting?
Yeah.
And also, isn't the governor trying to push for 5 days? So why are we still
Well,
saying
actually,
four
that's
if we're putting it off?
Yeah, that's not super accurate, Priscilla. What the governor is pushing for, without a ton of details, is all schools with in-person instruction by April. And there may be something different, because I can't say I know everything that comes out of the governor's mouth, but that's what my understanding is, what we're pushing for. And so when they say that, Priscilla, what he's speaking to is the fact that unlike the Wyndham Northeast Supervisory Union, there are a number of schools in Vermont who are fully remote. So their focus is, let's get everybody in schools. What I'm saying is, along the way, before we even get to April, there's a very good possibility that we're going to be in a good place to increase the amount of in-person instruction that we've got. But to do that this soon doesn't give the proper amount of attention to the increase in COVID, and quite honestly, the unknowns that go along with the new strain that's out there that is, from all accounts, much more easily spread. So let me just give you a little background on this, the history. Maybe this will help out also, Priscilla. So in early December, I think, we had a conversation internally here about looking for ways to increase the amount of in-person time for students for all the reasons that that's good. Our initial conversation was to look at Wednesdays that are fully remote and make those in-person days. Without reliving that whole conversation, suffice it to say, there are a number of very good reasons why Wednesdays as fully remote have a good place in what we are currently doing. So then the question came up, are there ways in which we can, we know that we are limited by space by our 6-foot distance between desks, but in many, actually in a majority of our classrooms, for a majority of our courses, we can fit all the students in. There's just too many, although still a minority, that we can't fit them all in, and that's what's left us where we are. Well, the question became, what if we were to do some remote within the building? In other words, what if we were able to bring the students in, have the classes that have the space for them, serve them there, and for the ones that can't fit them in, well, those students would have been fully remote anyhow. So why don't we see if we can find a safe way to have them do that remote work here, so that maybe if first block they need to be fully remote, then first block they need to work remotely, but second, third, and fourth block they can actually be in their classes. That's the concept that we've been working with here. And I think it's going to be a concept that's going to serve us well. And we started that conversation in December. You have to do that planning early on, but you do that planning while still looking at the numbers as you're progressing. And so we have gotten to the place where we need to make a decision on this. As we've approached this place to make a decision on this, COVID numbers have been going up. Vaccines haven't been coming out the way we want them to, because that was the other thing that we were talking about was, hey, maybe we can take advantage of vaccines coming out, but that's not happening as quickly as we want. And there's this additional strain this different strain of COVID-19 that is another negative variable that we need to factor in. And so with all of that said, we like this idea, but we want to kick it down the road, not a long ways. By the way, we're talking about kicking it a difference of 17 student days. And of those 17 student days, 4 of them were going to be remote Wednesdays anyhow. So that's why I'm very comfortable with us targeting after the February break to do this, because I think we can do a lot of good there and we can avoid a certain amount of potential harm with this more cautious approach to that. And by the way, coming back, Chad, I didn't forget your question. Actually, I did forget your question. What was Chad's question?
I don't know,
Chad,
but while you're thinking, what about the struggling students that were identified last semester? Are you going to maybe bring those
Oh
back?
yeah, so
No, right
those
now,
folks that have,
we're not looking
right,
at them.
those folks that have plans that were put in place in the first semester, those ones that are going 4 days, they're still going to 4 days. And those folks that have fully remote plans are going to go fully remote. It's just us delaying moving in another direction. I will say this much. Maybe this was what he was getting at, because this is what I was planning to say. We aren't really going to double the amount of students here. I want to make that point because getting back to what Priscilla said, we already have maybe 70 students that are already 4 days in place. And as Priscilla mentioned, and as I've mentioned before, we're doing that when we identify students that are particularly struggling in remote. So we will increase the number of students here by about 70 or 80 students. And a doubling would be more like bringing in 120 students. So I want to emphasize that as well, that we would increase our numbers, but it's not a wholesale doubling of the student population. We've done a lot of number crunching on this, as you might imagine. And by the way, I surveyed staff, I surveyed families and parents, and no one's going to be surprised by the fact that pretty much the survey of the parents and the families went straight down the middle. I mean, I'm talking about 264 responses. I'm looking at it here with 51.5% liking the idea and 48.5% not liking the idea. But I also asked a question about comfort level with this, and it was on a 1 to 5 scale. So 1 is I'm not comfortable at all. 5 is I am perfectly comfortable with this. And guess what? There's very little middle ground. You're either super comfortable with this or you're not comfortable at all with this. So 27% were very uncomfortable. 28% were perfectly fine. And it's kind of a U in between. The numbers go down as you go in the middle. So I got to tell you, I got good information because we had a lot of really good comments and I could read some of them to you, but those comments echo a lot of what's being talked about here right now. So I'm done talking on that for now.
Thanks, Chris.
Sure.
Jack?
I've got 3 questions, if you don't mind. The first one is, we went to some trouble to bring in the Dartmouth folks, particularly Dr. Loud and the folks both at Children's Hospital and folks in Keene. Have they been referenced in any of these decisions? That's question 1.
We have not consulted them yet.
I would feel more comfortable in these discussions if that had happened, because I'm, we're making a decision about something that has medical implications without talking to the medical guy. And I just want to set that out there.
Sure.
Second item is, okay, we're not doubling the number of students in the building, and I didn't think we were, but it did sound like we were increasing them by 30 to 40%, which I think is about right. And did the engineers feel there was a threshold where they would be less comfortable?
Well, we didn't ask that question, but the only piece of information I have relative to that, and I think you spoke to it briefly, Jack, was the airflow within the building.
Yep.
Per person. And what they noted was we didn't increase it, because that's one of those recommendations, but they did acknowledge that we did increase the amount of inside air per person because of the way we scheduled. But my point here is we certainly can increase it. I mean, there are reasons why we didn't, and I won't get into now, but
we can functionally.
we certainly can. We certainly can.
Okay,
Yeah.
that covers that item.
Wear your
And the-
jackets, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm just covering my bases here.
Yep.
The third item was, and I just want to go back to the math of this, because, there is a calculus for contagion, and it's basically one of these 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 + 5 + 6 type of things, where every time you add a contact point, you're adding it to all the people that are in the room, not just by one person. You're statistically increasing your odds of contagion, your R factor that way. And so I just want that to be understood, that this isn't doubling the likelihood, it's doing it by a significant factor 20 perhaps, when we add significant students into this process. Now, given that COVID rates around us are still lower than the rest of the country, that's the good news, but the bad news is we are increasing the risks. With that in mind, what is the flip switch here if a kid shows up positive? How soon do we close the building? Do we not close the building? What's the
Sure.
process? In
So
the unified district, it's been, we have a kid that shows positive, that building is closed as soon as we hear about it.
Right.
And what's the process here?
So it is not that black and white here at the high school in terms of one kid and we close the building. But there's a really, really important, significant difference between the elementaries and the high school relative to social distancing and relative to what the state defines as close contact, because close contact is a big deal. And
Yep.
if you have a lot of close contact, that is a big deal. If you have next to no close contact, then your situation is different. And unfortunately, I know way more about this than I ever wanted to, because I had to do a lot of tracking down of close contacts for the last time we had a community member with spread here. But I ended up finding out some very good news for us.
Okay.
So before I get to that, let me just say, I would not support this unless we could continue every single one of the COVID-19 safety protocols that are in place. Screening, masks for everyone, sanitizing hands between classes, sanitizing desks between classes, maintaining 6 feet space. And so I'm stopped there because that's what I want to get to. When I had to do the work around contact tracing for one of our positives, the definition of close contact has to do with time and distance. So it starts with really distance. People closer than 6 feet, I don't want to emphasize, that's what they say, closer than 6 feet, for an accumulation of more than 15 minutes. And one of the reasons the only close contacts we had with this individual was on the transport to school, which, by the way, was not on a bus, it was by private vehicle.
Yeah.
Because we are really good at keeping our desks 6 feet apart. You can come in here, we got tape marks where the desks belong. If someone moves a desk, we put it back. And the little short time in passing in the hallway, even if someone's closer than 6 feet, it's not anywhere close enough to accumulate to a close contact. So, Jack, you're talking about the exponential increase of increasing the numbers. I'm speaking to the safety protocols that keep us ever getting to a close contact place. And the one other piece of really important data to share with you, and this actually came from the governor's last press conference that the governor wasn't at. So it was Montpelier's last press conference.
Right.
They noted when the topic came up for school, at that point in time, the current positivity rate in the state of Vermont was 2.9%, which is big for Vermont, but
small everywhere else.
But is unbelievably good compared to the rest of the country. So much so that the state sees it gone to 2.9%, but they still feel like we're in a good place with that. They've been doing testing of staff. I don't know if everyone's aware of that, but there is a testing program. It's a voluntary one for all schools, and we've been participating in it. I don't have any data for our district, but we've had a lot of people participating in it. I've participated in it. The positivity rate, remember, the positivity rate for the state of Vermont is 2.9%. The positivity rate for the staff members that have been tested in the state of Vermont is 0.9%.
Right.
So
Well, the threshold number is supposed to be between 2.3 and 2.5. The fact that we've crossed it in the state of Vermont is a worry, but I do take your point about the teaching and staff community being much lower and that being a good thing.
So I just want to emphasize, though, I support this down the road after the February break because we will continue all of the COVID-19 safe protocols because we are not genuinely doubling the number of students here, even though it sounds like that. And because we already have some data that says Vermont's in good shape, schools are in even better shape with that 0.9% of positivity for this randomized sample in schools. So,
To get back to the question I asked, though, which was, what is the shutdown protocol? Who makes a decision? How does it happen?
right.
You know,
I will tell you that there is a flow chart that I don't have access to right now, but the best answer I could give you is it is not about, one, it has to do with the contact tracing piece. And that's
Okay.
my best answer to you.
Okay, fair enough. I've done my grilling.
Jack, I can elaborate a little bit on that. What it does when we meet with the whereas the contact tracer or individual at the state in regards to making that determination, they give us, this is what you should do. We can do more, but we can't do less than what they're recommending. And if you look at, if you go on the site and you look at all the various different models of what can be closed, you can close a pod, you can close a school, you can close this. And so it's very individualized based on each school and how it's set up and what the contact tracing shows. But it's like, for instance, in Westminster, they said, recommended X and we did more, we just couldn't do
Right.
less. And that's usually what the case. The state's not gonna tell us exactly what to do, to a point. But like I said, they always say we can do more, but we can't do less than what they're saying. But it's all based on the contact tracing, like Chris said.
Okay, as I said, I just wanted to cover those items. I do encourage you to talk to Dr. Loud if you would, but
Sure.
other than that, I'm good.
My school nurse has a task for the morning.
Thanks.
Margot has her hand up.
Go ahead, Margot.
Chris, you mentioned that you had polled the staff, and I'm just wondering if you might be able to share a little bit from how.
So I want you to know this came after what I felt was a very good. We've been sharing information along the way, and we had what I felt like was a very good faculty meeting conversation on this, and then I polled them. I purposely stayed away from the fence riding, so it was just yes, let's do it, or no, let's not do it. And remember, that question was based on the start of the second semester, and I had 62.5% in favor of doing it and 37.5 again it.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay, I don't see anyone. We have a motion on the floor to authorize the Bells Falls Union High School administration and staff to transition to a more intensive plan for in-person instruction during this COVID-19 crisis, no earlier than the first week of in-person instruction after the February break, and no later than the start of the fourth quarter, unless a subsequent action by this board dictates otherwise, or the state dictates. Is that what you wanted added, David?
Yes, thank you, Molly.
Okay. Deb Wright. Is Deb still with us? We'll go back. How about Jack?
I'm good. I asked a ton of questions.
I think
You're
she's
yes?
voting no now. I think
Was
you're
that a
voting.
yes,
sorry.
Jack?
Yes.
Okay. Brenda?
Yes.
David?
Yes, Molly.
Margot?
Yes,
Priscilla?
Yes, and today's rate was 2.6%
Oh, good.
plus two.
Steve,
Yes.
do we have Deb Wright back?
No, I don't see her on the list.
Okay, motion passes.
Thank you for your support, folks.
Thank you. The next thing we have is executive session for the SU building lease. Do we need that? Chris Pratt?
I think the executive board's meeting tomorrow, so I would say,
Yeah.
we should
I don't
hold
think
off.
we need that.
Yeah, I
Yep,
don't think we need that now. We're
right.
unsure, so we put it on just in case.
yep. Director's comments, Jack.
Just glad that we passed a budget. Hope that it's the right amount. A little worried that it might not be. And I'm glad that we are moving towards more days in school. A little concerned about whether the trip switch is sufficiently nervous in terms of a quick closure. But other than that, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Brenda,
All set.
thank you. David,
Molly, I am also all set.
Margot,
I'm all set, thanks.
Priscilla,
Yeah, let me comment that, yes, today's numbers too, that they reflected from yesterday, were down from about the lowest in about the last 7 days. And we've not had any deaths for 3 days, so maybe we'll be going in the total right direction and we'll get there. Just
Good.
everybody think positive.
thank you. Steve,
I'm all set.
thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next meeting.
Thanks, Molly.
Indeed.